Hey there, and welcome to The Story. I'm Ashley Korslund, in for Pat Doris, who is on vacation this week. All the ways to get in touch with us are right at the bottom of your screen. You can email us at the website here, The Story at kgw.com. Use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter, or call us and leave us a voicemail. Our number is 503-226-5090. And hey, before we get into our big story tonight, we have some news to tell you about this show. Starting on Monday, The Story is changing time slots. Instead of coming to you live at 6 o'clock, we are moving to 6:30. You'll see David Molko and Laurel Porter bringing you KGW News at 6 now during this time slot. Everything else you love about The Story will stay exactly the same, but instead of at 6 o'clock, you can watch us at 6:30. Or if 6:30 doesn't work for you, you can check us out anytime on KGW's YouTube channel or KGW Plus. Again, that all starts this coming Monday, July 31st. All right, now let's get to our big story. Have you ever heard of pumped hydro energy storage? Well, it's one of the oldest forms of energy storage still in use today. Soon, a large pumped hydro project will break ground near the Columbia River. If and when it gets built, it could help the Northwest get closer to those lofty clean energy goals that we're approaching in the coming decades. But the project has some major opposition, primarily from tribes in the area who say the project would destroy several sites that they hold sacred. Environmental reporter Kil Williams talked to the company working to move the project forward and to the people who are dead set on stopping it.
The Columbia River is, as my aunt would say, is the veins of Mother Earth, and it's like us, we have veins and the blood of who we are and the blood of Mother Earth here.
This is a very important food gathering area for the Yakamas, and it's where some of our first foods come in the spring.
Jeremy Takala and Elaine Harvey are both citizens of Yakama Nation, made up of 14 bands and tribes from all over eastern Washington. And this stretch of the Columbia, near the John Day Dam, it holds special importance to them.
10 to 15 miles this way, there's an existing longhouse where we have many different ceremonies, including first food ceremonies, which also consist of gathering foods at this location.
In 1855, the tribes of Yakama Nation relinquished much of their ancestral homeland to the U.S. government. But they retained rights to hunt, gather foods, and fish on what is now known as ceded lands, which cover much of eastern Washington. The land and their use of it remains an integral part of their identity.
Every year we honor our foods when they come around within our home, and many of our elders, the adults, the children partake and still continue on that way of life. So with the project being proposed here, it will definitely impact our life.
The project he's referring to is the Goldendale Pumped Hydro Storage Project.
Pumped hydro storage is the oldest form. It's also the most used form of energy storage in the U.S.
That's Eric Steinley with Rye Development, the company hoping to build the project. Pumped hydro storage works like this. There are two reservoirs, one down by the river and another 2,000 feet above on the bluff overlooking the gorge. Connecting the two, there's a 30-foot diameter tunnel running through the mountain with a turbine inside. Water is pumped into the top reservoir, then released through the tunnel, spinning the turbine and generating electricity. And pumped hydro can solve one of the biggest problems with wind and solar energy. Those systems work great when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, but those times they don't always line up with when people need their power the most. Pumped hydro can fill in those gaps.
During periods of time when we need electricity, but the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, we just release that water and we have on-demand carbon-free electricity.
Energy storage will be increasingly important as Oregon and Washington move toward ambitious clean energy goals. Steinley said the region will need an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 megawatts of energy storage to fully meet those goals. The Goldendale project, it could provide around 1,200 of those megawatts, enough to power the city of Seattle for up to 12 hours.
So for the states of Oregon and Washington, they're seeing these big needs for energy storage right around 2030.
Yep.
And so this project is set up to align with those goals.
And unlike battery storage, pumped hydro doesn't require lithium mining, and it has a much longer life than batteries, which can be difficult to dispose of. But for all the problems pumped hydro can solve, it creates just as many for the citizens of Yakama Nation. problems that feel all too familiar.
This area between the basalt bastions of the gorge.
You know, this just feels like we are going through the times of when the dams were constructed and when the government decided they're going to do this, and they did it, no matter what the impacts to the tribes were.
Harvey's ancestral village was destroyed when the dams went up on the Columbia River. And one of the most productive fishing sites, Celilo Falls, was inundated. And Takala sees parallels between those energy projects and the one being proposed here, at the site of a former aluminum smelting plant.
You know, I hear elders say enough is enough. You know, we've had a smelter plant here, and it's in need of a cleanup. You have the hydro system right next door, and we've already seen the impacts of it. Historically, it traumatized our people.
The pumped hydro project, which would include 2 60-acre reservoirs and a 3,000-foot-long tunnel through the mountain, would be on or near several sacred sites to the Yakama Nation, some of which are eligible for the National Registry of Historic Places. One of ththose is Juniper Point, called Pushpum in the Yakama language.
It's just like any other cathedral, a church, or a capital, that's very important to, our citizens of this country.
They want to drill a 30-foot tunnel with a powerhouse in it in our sacred site. That's a total desecration of our sacred site.
One thing I can say is
Steinle said his company has tried to do all they can to lessen the impacts of the project. They picked the site because it was already developed, home to a wind farm. They moved the location of the upper reservoir down from the ridgetop, and they're working to provide access to the tribes once construction is complete.
part of what we can do is continue to have that conversation and provide access to traditional gathering and other types of activities.
But Takala and Harvey, they aren't interested in lessening the impact to a place they hold sacred.
And there's no mitigation out, that could replace any of the archaeological sites, that can replace the traditional cultural properties, or, just our sacred mountain in general.
And they aren't interested in negotiating with a private developer either. Instead, they've sent letters to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which would grant final approval for the project, asking for direct negotiations with the government.
We are not a public stakeholder. We are a sovereign nation.
Takala said the tribes haven't gotten a response, so I emailed the commission myself, and I also didn't hear back. Steinle, he said the concerns of the tribe are not completely unfounded.
We understand that this area is significant. That it doesn't matter so much that it's private land or that it's fully developed, that there's still significance to the site.
But
assuming, all the permits go through, everything is approved, if the tribes are still opposed to this, I'm assuming that the project will move forward.
Under certain conditions, yes.
If that's the case, Harvey said it would feel like another link in a chain of infrastructure projects that have either downplayed or ignored the concerns of the people who have lived here the longest.
At a personal level, it's really heartbreaking. And, I think about our ancestors who had to deal with the dams being built. They had to deal with highways and railroads being constructed. This is another, it's like another wave.
And Cale Williams joins me in studio now. So is there a timeline for these potential approvals and construction? I mean, how far along is the project?
Yeah, so pretty far along in terms of the permits. They got their last state permit that they needed from the state of Washington, the water quality permit, earlier this year. Now they need to get permits from the feds, as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They're going to issue their final environmental impact statement later this year that will look at all the impacts to fish and wildlife, animals, and these culturally important sites. From there, they get their final certificate of operation and construction, which will last for 50 years.
Wow. Early
next year, if this all goes through.
Okay, we'll see what happens with that. Kind of curious, did the company look at other sites that maybe, weren't so sacred to the tribes? Or if so, why was this one the best selection?
I mean, there are a lot of unique attributes to this site, aside from all the concerns of the folks at the Yakama Nation. I mean, you need a place where you can build 2 reservoirs with a great deal of elevation between them near a water source. On top of all that, this site also sits right along a northwest corridor of transmission lines, so they wouldn't have to build any new roads. They wouldn't have to build any new transmission lines, and both of these sites are already developed. And they said that they've been looking at this site for decades to do just this kind of project, so they're not really looking anywhere else.
Right, so on paper for the company it looks good. I'm curious if for the tribes, do they have any recourse aside from what they've already done though?
That remains to be seen. I mean, they have told me explicitly that they do not want to negotiate with this company. They see this as a nation-to-nation kind of negotiation between Yakama Nation and the U.S. government. So they've sent letters to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They have not heard back. But I think what's really important to get at here is kind of this perspective that the tribe looks at this land. First, the perspective of the developers. Jeremy Takala told me developers come in and they see, the mountains and the canyons and the river, and they think, what can we do with this land? What can it do for us?
Right.
And when the tribes look at these same features, the mountain, the rivers, the canyons, they see them as doing what they're supposed to be doing.
How do we preserve them?
Exactly. And unless the federal government comes around to that perspective, I think that it's a long shot that the tribes are going to be able to stop this.
All right, well, keep us posted on the project timeline, Gail. Thank
will.
you. Well, it's been more than a month now since Oregon lawmakers passed a bill that could bring some big changes to the way Oregonians get their gas for the first time since 1951. If Governor Tina Kotek signs the bill into law, you will have the choice to have the gas station attendant pump your gas for you like we've done for decades, or you can pump it yourself. So, will Governor Kotek sign this into law? That is the big question, and one that Kotek so far has refused to answer. Today, she did sign a package of housing and homeless bills, which of course is very important. But when asked about the gas bill, she said she's still deciding, but that she has heard from a lot of you.
First of all, I want to thank Oregonians who took up my request to let us know how they feel about self-serve gas. I think we've received over 5,000 emails on that. So we're reviewing those. Tomorrow is the deadline by which I have to notice whether or not the potential vetoes are in the works. I'm not saying that's on the list, but you will know by tomorrow if it is, because we have to give a 5-day notice to let people know whether I might be vetoing bills. But I'm still reviewing it at this point.
Okay, so we will let you know what happens tomorrow on that. If the governor does sign the bill into law, it would take effect immediately. Let us know what you would like her to do. You can send us your thoughts on this or any of our other stories to thestory@kgw.com. When we come back, another look at the ambulance shortage in Multnomah County. We've learned that a federal officer couldn't get an ambulance after he was attacked on the job in Pioneer Courthouse Square earlier this month. We'll explain what he had to do in order to get medical help when the story returns. Earlier this month, a man attacked a U.S. Marshal who was guarding the courthouse at Pioneer Courthouse Square. We've now learned there was no ambulance available to help the injured Marshal. He had to be taken to the hospital in a car while bleeding from his head because no ambulance could get to him to help him. Investigative reporter Evan Watson has been looking into Multnomah County's ambulance problems for months. Here's what he learned about this case.
In the heart of downtown Portland on July 3rd, investigators say Jet Thomas came close to killing a U.S. Marshal's deputy who was working as a Pioneer Courthouse security officer. Shots from security video show how it unfolded. Thomas climbed a courthouse gate, choked and punched the officer in the head, put him in a chokehold outside, and then hit him in the head with his radio.
Oh yeah, they were tussling pretty aggressively, and like I said, the suspect was getting the best of the security guard.
According to an affidavit, a witness told investigators that the officer's face was turning purplish blue. Before anyone could call for help, the officer got away and shot Thomas twice in the stomach.
I heard two pat-pats, and I was like, whoa.
Both men survived their injuries. Thomas is charged with assaulting a federal employee. But it's what happened right after the shooting that makes Aaron Schmaltz, a police union president, ask, what if it was worse?
At the end of the day, if someone's experiencing a medical crisis in the city, when they call 911, it's our moral responsibility to have an ambulance available, just full stop.
In the affidavit, FBI Special Agent Joseph Youngblood said there was no ambulance available to take the officer to the hospital, so U.S. Marshals employees drove him themselves. The officer said he had head and neck pain during the ride, and he was bleeding from his mouth and his ear.
Our officer, the hero who's involved in this incident, we're going to get them to help. But, having that kind of first major level of advanced health and medical care is a huge kind of life or death reality. The sooner you get people to care, the sooner that you have a chance of them surviving.
KGW recently obtained data from the Portland Bureau of Emergency Communications that confirms Youngblood's report. Multnomah County ambulance provider AMR was at level 0 on the morning of July 3rd, meaning it had no ambulance available to send to a serious assault on a federal officer.
Our entire kind of woven web of public safety needs help. We need more firefighters, we need more paramedics.
AMR being at level 0 is nothing new. Dispatchers couldn't immediately send an ambulance crew to 29 different 911 calls on July 3rd, the day of this alleged assault. In Multnomah County, more than 6,000 emergency calls have received the level 0 treatment this year alone. The company says it's working to increase staffing and solve this problem by triaging ambulance response. County leaders have called AMR's performance incredibly disturbing, but have so far declined to fine the company or force changes. Evan Watson, KGW News.
Well, one of Oregon's most notorious far-right activists has been ordered to pay more than $50 million to a hospital in Idaho. You'll remember Ammon Bundy, who led a 41-day armed occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 2016. How could you forget this? They were protesting the federal control of public lands. Well, Bundy was eventually arrested and later acquitted of all federal charges in that case, but he went on to face criminal charges for protesting COVID restrictions at the Idaho State House in 2021. Then ran unsuccessfully as a candidate for Idaho's governor in 22. Well, now he's lost a defamation case after a 2-week trial in Idaho for a different case. Bundy and an associate named Diego Rodriguez must pay $52 million in damages to St. Luke's health system and other plaintiffs. So some backstory here. St. Luke's filed the lawsuit after Bundy's supporters did some days-long protesting outside the hospital in Boise in March of last year. The protest was centered around Rodriguez's infant grandson, who was temporarily removed by CPS from the family and taken to St. Luke's Hospital over health concerns. Police had said at the time that medical personnel determined the child was malnourished and had lost weight. Bundy had urged his followers at the protest at the hospital and at the homes of child protection service workers, law enforcement officers, and others involved in the case. Rodriguez claimed his grandson was kidnapped and inferred that officials were involved in child trafficking for profit. So the hospital had none of that, filed the lawsuit more than a year ago, and claimed Bundy and Rodriguez orchestrated a smear campaign against it. A jury awarded the plaintiffs $26 million in punitive damages and $26.5 million in compensatory damages. So how does Emmon Bundy feel about the verdict? Well, he told our sister station in Boise, "I'm embarrassed for the court. This confirms everything I have said, and I am glad that I did not participate and legitimize the process." When asked if he would appeal or pay, he said neither. Here's what the attorney for St. Luke's told our sister station KTVB back in April when the lawsuit was ongoing.
Mr. Bundy, there's no basis for him to delegitimize the process. St. Luke's followed the laws. They presented evidence in a court under oath in front of a jury. I think the fact that St. Luke's pursued that route is an affirmation of our system and that it works. The fact that the system continues to work, even when somebody like Mr. Bundy tries to opt out of the process, is a testament to the strength of the system.
Okay, so then logistically, how does it work? How does somebody get that kind of money from somebody who claims to have no assets?
It's a typical process to go through collection. There'll be efforts to discover what assets Mr. Bundy really has. So the law has mechanisms to address these situations, and I fully expect St. Luke's to be committed to pursuing all legal means at recovery.
Yeah, time will tell if the hospital sees any of that $52 million. We'll have to follow up on that. By the way, both Bundy and Rodriguez still have civil warrants out for their arrests. Well, still ahead, part 2 of the story of a woman who went missing nearly 3 decades ago in Mount Rainier National Park. How a small-town reporter has been working for years to keep the story of Sheila Kern's death in the headlines.
Next at 6:30, a check on the Washington County Sheriff's deputy shot and critically wounded while serving an eviction notice, plus the identity of the man who pulled the trigger. Then federal money's on the way to help Portland's Jewish community protect against extremist violence, how the funds will be used to boost security. And a new toxic algae bloom pops up, the water you'll want to keep the kids and pets out of for now. Those stories and more coming up next at 6:30. We hope to see you then.
It's been 27 years since the remains of Sheila Kearns were found in Mount Rainier National Park. The FBI doesn't have a person of interest, but while Sheila's friends wonder who or what is responsible for her death, we've learned that one person is responsible for keeping Sheila's story alive. This is the second part of a story we brought you last night. Steve Solis reports.
know that she left a note. We have no idea where she went, who she might have went with, or what her plans were.
I remember Sheila as somebody who was incredibly spiritual, very soft-spoken, very introspective. I'm Ryan Hill, and I worked with Sheila Kearns at Mount Rainier National Park in 1996. She also was incredibly careful, always on edge that or something from her past was coming to catch up with her.
She seemed like a person who had a past in some way. I don't know what that past was, but just that she was trying to start clean and fresh.
She married a fella, and she put him through med school, and then he said adios after he got his degree, and that's how she came up to our place.
Sheila was reported missing, or was last seen around October 4th. It wasn't until May of '97 that her remains were located at a nearby area near the housing that she was moving into.
She came in the middle of August, September, and the first week of October. I mean, that's only like 6 or 7 weeks for something like this, so devastating to happen to somebody that was just with us so shortly.
The FBI tells us they have a couple of theories about how Sheila was killed.
Two include that maybe she was attacked by a mountain lion while she was out for a walk.
I don't think she was going to go out for a walk, is what the rangers said, that she liked to go out there for a walk and a cougar got her.
There's also the theory that she was abducted and killed. We were unable back then to collect enough physical evidence to support either of those theories.
It's very discouraging that 27 years later, what happened to Sheila is still a mystery. Throughout the years, there has been less and less information about the story on the internet.
When we started to research this story, we didn't find very much about this case either. However, over the years, there was one person who kept digging for details. Dixie Walter was a reporter at a small newspaper in Eatonville. Over the years, she recorded and kept every interview she did, including with Sheila's mom, Olive, and Sheila's former co-worker, Jules Hayden.
It's too many questions. Well, that's it. There's too many questions, and they all have to be answered at some point. And there's an answer. There's got to be. There's an answer to every mystery.
She contacted me as a person of interest that had worked with her. And we would sit there and ponder that back and forth, back and forth. I'm going, no, it couldn't be him. No. But you never know. Never know. I was just listening to a tape of Olive the other night with Dixie talking to her. And it was just so sad.
See, I don't really care now about them finding who did it. I know I shouldn't feel like that. You just want to put her to rest. Yeah, I do. I just don't feel like maybe I'll face up to it better to just put her to rest.
The amount of research and the amount of hours that she spent making phone calls, interviewing people, trying to connect loose ends together.
She was the one who was keeping the story alive.
While the Kearns case went closed, Dixie's reporting has revived Sheila's story. And now her friends and family are seeking justice and closure, while the FBI says more than anything, they are seeking anyone who will speak up.
There are some people that knew her well that are still in the area. For them to come forward and tell us again what they remember, what they know, would be very helpful.
Like if the story reaches one person, who calls the FBI, that could be the missing piece that would solve the case and bring Sheila and her family, justice and closure.
And if you missed the first part of the story about the death of Sheila Kearns, you can watch it right now on KGW.com. Just search for Sheila Kearns and it'll take you to the article and the video. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.